A millionaire CEO disguises himself as a struggling single dad and meets a kind-hearted teacher who pays for his dinner and offers her humble home without hesitation. Touched by her selflessness, he leaves with hope, knowing she's someone special. Days later, she sees him on TV as the powerful CEO of a billion-dollar company and calls him in shock. He confesses the truth, proposes to her and changes her life forever, making her the proud adoptive mother of his twin daughters. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as 40-year-old Daniel Harrison adjusted his worn baseball cap and checked his reflection in his phone screen. Gone was the tailored Armani suit that usually defined his presence in boardrooms across Manhattan. Instead, he wore faded jeans with a carefully placed hole in the knee, a wrinkled thrift store t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days 3 years ago. "Daddy, why are you dressed like that?" 6-year-old Emma asked, tugging at his fake distressed jacket with curiosity sparkling in her bright blue eyes. Her twin sister Grace nodded in agreement, both girls looking impeccable in their matching pink dresses and pristine white sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Daniel Harrison was the CEO of Harrison Industries, a technology empire worth $12 billion that he had built from nothing over the past 15 years. His face regularly graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines, and his investment decisions could move stock markets. But today, he was conducting the most important experiment of his life, one that would determine whether the woman he'd been thinking about for weeks was truly as remarkable as she seemed. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had attended a parent-teacher conference at Willowbrook Elementary. The meeting had been routine until he encountered Sarah Mitchell, the new third-grade teacher who had recently transferred from the struggling public school across town. While other faculty members treated him with careful deference, Sarah had spoken to him with genuine warmth about his daughter's academic progress and social development. "Mr. Harrison," she had said with infectious enthusiasm, "Emma and Grace are absolutely brilliant children. Emma has a natural gift for mathematics, and Grace's creative writing shows remarkable imagination, but more importantly, they're kind to their classmates and always willing to help students who are struggling." What struck Daniel most profoundly wasn't Sarah's professional competence, but her obvious passion for teaching. When he mentioned that his busy travel schedule sometimes made him feel disconnected from his daughter's daily experiences, Sarah had suggested that he spend more time observing how his children interacted with the world. "Sometimes the most important lessons happen in ordinary moments," she had said with wisdom that seemed to illuminate something he'd been missing. Children need to see their parents as real people, not just providers. Her words had haunted him for weeks. Daniel realized that his daughters knew him primarily as someone who worked constantly and expressed love through expensive gifts rather than quality time. More troubling was his growing awareness that he had no idea how to assess whether someone cared about him as a person versus his bank account. Every woman he'd dated since his wife Catherine's tragic death 4 years ago had known about his wealth from the beginning, making it impossible to determine whether their feelings were authentic. "We're playing pretend today," Daniel explained to his daughters as they walked toward the park's playground area. "Daddy wants to see how people treat families who don't have as much money as we do. It's like a social experiment to understand how the world really works." Emma, always the more analytical of the twins, frowned thoughtfully. "But why would people treat us differently because of money? That doesn't seem fair." "That's exactly what we're going to find out, sweetheart," Daniel said, his heart swelling with pride at her innocent wisdom. "Today, we're going to learn about the difference between people who are kind because they want something from us, and people who are kind because that's who they are inside." Grace pointed toward the park's small cafe, where a familiar figure was setting up what appeared to be a tutoring session. "Daddy, look, it's Miss Sarah from school. Can we go say hello?" Daniel's pulse quickened as he spotted Sarah Mitchell arranging books and supplies at a picnic table near the cafe. She wore a simple yellow sundress, but she radiated warmth and contentment that made her absolutely beautiful. Her genuine smile as she helped a young boy with his homework made Daniel's chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't felt since Catherine's death. "Yes," Daniel said, making a decision that would change all their lives. "Let's go say hello to Miss Sarah. But remember, today we're just a regular family having a regular day at the park." Daniel felt nervous in a way that billion-dollar business negotiations had never made him feel. This woman had no idea she was about to meet the real Daniel Harrison. Not the wealthy CEO, but the man underneath who desperately wanted to believe that genuine goodness still existed. Sarah Mitchell looked up from helping 8-year-old Marcus with his multiplication tables and smiled with genuine delight when she spotted Emma and Grace Harrison approaching with a man she didn't immediately recognize. The twins were dressed more casually than usual, but their excitement was unmistakable. "Miss Sarah," Grace called out, waving enthusiastically. "We're at the park with Daddy. He's not working today." Sarah's eyes moved to the man following behind the girls, and for a moment she struggled to connect this casually dressed stranger with the impeccably groomed businessman she'd met during parent conferences. This version of Mr. Harrison wore clothes that had clearly seen better days. His hair was slightly unkempt. "Mr. Harrison?" Sarah said with friendly curiosity. Standing up from the picnic table where she'd been conducting free tutoring sessions for neighborhood children whose families couldn't afford educational support. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look so relaxed today." Daniel felt his carefully rehearsed story stick in his throat as Sarah's warm brown eyes studied his face with genuine interest. Her smile was exactly as he remembered, completely free of calculation, simply the natural expression of someone who found joy in connecting with others. "Please call me Dan," he said, using the shortened name he hadn't used since college. "I've been going through some changes lately, trying to focus more on what really matters, spending quality time with my girls, instead of always being buried in work." Sarah's expression softened with understanding and approval. "That's wonderful. So many parents struggle to find balance between providing for their families and being present for the important moments. Emma and Grace are lucky to have a father who's making that effort." The 3 children Sarah had been tutoring looked up with curiosity at the new arrivals. Marcus, whose single mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, studied Daniel's worn clothing with careful attention. "Miss Sarah," Emma said with 6-year-old directness, "Daddy says we're learning about how different people live today. Can we stay and watch you teach?" Daniel felt embarrassment mixed with pride. His daughters were naturally gravitating towards Sarah's teaching expertise, but they were also reinforcing his carefully constructed narrative about being a struggling single father. "Of course you can stay," Sarah said warmly, then looked at Daniel with concern that seemed entirely genuine. "Are you managing okay with everything?" Single parenting is incredibly challenging, especially when you're trying to balance work responsibilities. If you ever need someone to help with homework or just want the girls to have a safe place to spend time after school, I'd be happy to help. The offer hit Daniel like a physical blow to his chest. Here was this remarkable woman, barely knowing him, volunteering to provide unpaid childcare support because she believed he was struggling financially. Her generosity wasn't motivated by any desire to impress him. She had no idea about his wealth. She was simply responding to what she perceived as a father in need. That's incredibly kind of you," Daniel managed, his voice rougher than intended. "Things have been tight lately. Work hasn't been as steady as I'd hoped, and the girls need so much attention. I sometimes feel like I'm failing them." Sarah's hand briefly touched his arm in a gesture of comfort that sent electricity through his entire nervous system. "You're not failing them. Look at these beautiful, intelligent, well-behaved children. They clearly feel loved and secure. Sometimes the best thing we can do as parents is let our children see us working hard and caring deeply, even when circumstances are challenging." Grace tugged at Sarah's sundress with typical 6-year-old impatience. "Miss Sarah, can you show Daddy how you make learning fun?" Sarah laughed, a sound like silver bells that made Daniel's heart race. "Math can be tricky, but there are lots of games that make it easier. Would you like me to show you some techniques?" For the next hour, Daniel watched Sarah transform basic arithmetic into an engaging adventure using nothing but creative storytelling and genuine enthusiasm. She had Emma and Grace solving multiplication problems by imagining they were running a lemonade stand. More importantly, Daniel observed how Sarah treated every child with equal attention and respect. Regardless of their clothing or family circumstances, she praised effort rather than just results, and she created an environment where learning felt like play. As the afternoon progressed, Daniel found himself relaxing into his assumed role as a financially struggling single father. The performance felt less like deception and more like an opportunity to experience a different version of himself, one that wasn't defined by corporate success and material accumulation. "Mr. Dan," Sarah said as the tutoring session concluded and other families began collecting their children, "would you and the girls like to join me for dinner? There's a wonderful little family restaurant just down the street that has great food and a kids' menu. My treat, I insist." Daniel stared at her in amazement. She was offering to pay for their meal, believing he couldn't afford it himself. The gesture was so selfless, so genuinely caring, that he felt tears threatening his carefully maintained composure. "Sarah, you don't need to." "I want to," she interrupted firmly but kindly. "You're clearly a devoted father doing your best under difficult circumstances. Let me help in whatever small way I can. Besides, Emma and Grace brighten any room they enter. And I'd love to spend more time getting to know all of you better." As they walked toward the restaurant together, Daniel realized he was about to discover whether Sarah Mitchell was truly the extraordinary woman he hoped she was, or whether his cynical business instincts were right to doubt that such genuine goodness could exist in the world. Mama Rosa's family restaurant was exactly the kind of place Daniel Harrison would never have noticed during his normal life as a billionaire CEO. The modest establishment featured mismatched chairs, plastic checkered tablecloths, and comfortable chaos that came from being a genuine neighborhood gathering place. Sarah guided them to a corner booth with worn vinyl seats, and Daniel watched with growing amazement as she interacted with the restaurant staff like old friends. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired feet, greeted Sarah with genuine warmth. "Sarah, honey, good to see you again." The usual table. "Hi, Maria. I'd like you to meet Dan and his daughters, Emma and Grace. We're having a little celebration dinner tonight." Daniel felt Sarah's hand briefly touch his shoulder as she made the introduction, a casual gesture that somehow felt more intimate than any expensive romantic gesture he'd experienced in years. She was treating their impromptu dinner invitation as something special worth celebrating. "What are we celebrating, Miss Sarah?" Emma asked with 6-year-old curiosity as they settled into the booth. "We're celebrating new friendships," Sarah said with a smile that included all of them. "And the fact that your daddy is such a good father who cares so much about spending quality time with you." Grace leaned against Daniel's arm with complete trust and contentment. "Daddy's been different lately. He's been home more, and he doesn't talk on his phone as much during dinner." Daniel felt a pang of guilt mixed with revelation. His daughters had noticed his recent efforts to be more present, even though those efforts had been motivated by his growing interest in Sarah. The realization that his children craved his attention more than his financial provision was both humbling and heartbreaking. Sarah opened the laminated menu and immediately began pointing out the most affordable options. The spaghetti and meatballs here is absolutely delicious, and the portions are huge. The chicken parmesan is also wonderful, and it comes with enough food for leftovers tomorrow. Daniel watched in fascination as Sarah naturally steered their dinner choices toward budget-friendly options while making each selection sound appealing rather than economical. She was protecting his assumed financial dignity while ensuring he wouldn't feel embarrassed about accepting her generosity. "Miss Sarah," Grace said, with the innocent directness that often mortified parents, "why are you being so nice to us? Most grown-ups only talk to Daddy about boring work stuff." Sarah's expression grew thoughtful as she considered how to answer honestly without overwhelming a 6-year-old with adult complexities. "Well, Grace, I think kindness is like a gift that gets bigger when you share it. When I see a good father working hard to take care of his children, it makes me happy to help in whatever way I can." Daniel felt tears threatening his composure again. Sarah's philosophy of kindness wasn't theoretical. It was the practical expression of someone who genuinely believed in helping others without expecting anything in return. She was treating him and his daughters like family, not charity cases. When Maria returned to take their order, Sarah took charge with gentle efficiency. "We'll have the family-style spaghetti and meatballs for the table, and could you bring some extra garlic bread?" "Sarah," Daniel protested quietly, "you really don't need to." "Dan, please," Sarah said firmly but warmly. "Let me do this. It brings me joy to share a meal with people I care about. Consider it an investment in our friendship." As they waited for their food, Sarah engaged Emma and Grace in conversation with the same focused attention she brought to her classroom teaching. She asked about their favorite subjects, their dreams for the future, and their opinions on everything from favorite books to preferred ice cream flavors. "I want to be a teacher like you when I grow up," Grace announced, with the certainty that only children possessed. "You make learning seem like magic." "And I want to help Daddy with his work," Emma added. "He gets stressed sometimes, and I think he needs a helper." Daniel's heart clenched at his daughter's perceptive observation. Even at 6 years old, Emma had noticed his work-related stress and wanted to help alleviate it. He realized that his children saw him more clearly than he saw himself. Sarah reached across the table and gently touched Emma's hand. "Your daddy is lucky to have daughters who care so much about his happiness. The most important thing any parent can have is children who love them unconditionally." When their food arrived, Sarah insisted on serving everyone, making sure the girls got the best portions and that Daniel had plenty to eat. She created an atmosphere of abundance and celebration around a simple pasta dinner that probably cost less than Daniel typically spent on a single glass of wine. "This is the best spaghetti ever," Grace declared, twirling noodles around her fork with concentration. "Everything tastes better when you share it with people you enjoy," Sarah said, smiling at Grace's enthusiasm. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself relaxing completely for the first time in months. Sarah's genuine warmth, combined with his daughter's obvious happiness, created a sense of family contentment he hadn't experienced since Catherine's death. The conversation flowed naturally between topics ranging from the girls' school experiences to Sarah's teaching philosophy to Daniel's carefully edited stories about his work challenges. When Maria brought the check, Sarah smoothly intercepted it before Daniel could even reach for his wallet. "My treat, remember. I absolutely insist." Daniel watched in amazement as Sarah paid for their entire meal without any hesitation. She was investing her own modest teacher's salary in what she believed was helping a struggling single father. "Sarah," Daniel said as they prepared to leave the restaurant, "I don't know how to thank you for tonight. Your kindness means more than you could possibly know." Sarah's response would haunt him for weeks to come. "Dan, genuine kindness doesn't require thanks. It just requires the willingness to see the good in people and help however you can. You're clearly a wonderful father who loves his daughters deeply. That's all the thanks I need." End. As they walked back to the park where their cars were parked, Daniel realized he was falling in love with Sarah Mitchell, not just with her beauty or her kindness, but with her entire approach to life that prioritized human connection over material success. But he also knew that his deception was becoming more complicated with every passing moment. As they reached the parking lot, where Sarah's modest Honda Civic sat next to Daniel's carefully chosen rental car, a 5-year-old Ford sedan that looked appropriately worn, Emma tugged at her father's hand with the insistence that only tired 6-year-olds could muster. "Daddy, I don't want tonight to end," she said with a yawn. "Miss Sarah makes everything more fun. Can we see her again soon?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level with the natural grace that made her such an effective teacher. "Emma, I had such a wonderful time with you and Grace and your daddy tonight. I hope we can be friends for a very long time." Grace, not to be outdone by her twin's emotional expression, threw her arms around Sarah's neck in a spontaneous hug. "You're the nicest grown-up we know besides Daddy. I wish you could come have dinner at our house sometime." Daniel felt panic flutter in his chest at his daughter's innocent invitation. Their house was a $30 million penthouse that would immediately expose his deception. The living room alone contained artwork worth more than Sarah's annual salary. "That's a sweet invitation, Grace," Sarah said warmly. "But I'm sure your daddy has enough to manage without worrying about entertaining guests. Maybe instead, you could come visit my little house sometime. I have a garden where we could plant flowers together and a piano that needs someone to play it." The casual mention of owning a piano triggered Emma's immediate interest. "You have a piano?" "We used to take lessons, but Daddy said—" She stopped abruptly, looking uncertainly at Daniel. Daniel's mind raced to complete his daughter's unfinished sentence. "Piano lessons got too expensive when things became difficult," he said quietly, hating himself for using his children's genuine musical interest to reinforce his deception. Sarah's expression filled with understanding and determination. "Well, that's easily solved. I'd be happy to give Emma and Grace piano lessons. I taught music before I became a classroom teacher, and I miss having students. Consider it my contribution to their education." The generosity of her offer hit Daniel like a physical blow. Sarah was volunteering her free time, her musical expertise, and her personal space to provide his daughters with opportunities she believed their father couldn't afford. Her kindness wasn't abstract or theoretical. It was practical, immediate, and completely selfless. "Sarah, you've already done so much for us tonight," Daniel protested, though part of him desperately wanted to accept any excuse to spend more time in her presence. "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Sarah interrupted with gentle firmness. "I'm offering. Emma and Grace are exceptional children, and every child deserves the opportunity to explore their artistic potential. Music education isn't a luxury, it's a gift that lasts a lifetime." As they said their goodbyes, Sarah surprised Daniel by pulling a business card from her purse. Not her school contact information, but a simple card with her personal phone number written in careful handwriting. "Dan, please don't hesitate to call if you ever need anything." "Ah," she said, with sincere warmth. "Whether it's help with homework or someone to watch the girls, I mean that sincerely." Daniel accepted the card with hands that trembled slightly, knowing that she was offering him access to her personal life based on her belief that he was a struggling single father. The trust implicit in her gesture was both humbling and terrifying. "And girls," Sarah added, addressing Emma and Grace directly, "remember that your daddy loves you very much. Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times, but that doesn't change how proud he is of you, or how hard he's working to give you the best life possible." As Daniel drove his daughters home to their penthouse, he listened to them chatter excitedly about Sarah's kindness, her teaching skills, and the possibility of piano lessons. Their genuine affection for her was obvious, and their happiness at having spent the evening in her company made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't fully identify. "Daddy," Grace said from her car seat as they navigated Manhattan traffic, "Miss Sarah is like a princess, but the kind who helps people instead of living in a castle." "She's better than a princess," Emma added with 6-year-old wisdom. "Princesses are just pretend, but Miss Sarah is real. And she cares about people who don't have very much money." Daniel realized his daughters had unconsciously grasped something profound about Sarah's character that went beyond her surface kindness. She wasn't performing charity or seeking social recognition for her good deeds. She was simply living according to principles that prioritized human welfare over personal gain. That night, after putting Emma and Grace to bed in their designer bedroom, Daniel sat in his home office staring at Sarah's handwritten business card. The modest piece of paper represented everything he had been searching for: genuine human connection based on character rather than wealth, kindness offered without expectation of return. But it also represented the growing complexity of his deception. Every moment he continued pretending to be someone he wasn't, deepened his betrayal of Sarah's trust, and made the eventual revelation more potentially devastating. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at Sarah's number for nearly an hour, composing and deleting text messages that ranged from casual thanks for dinner to elaborate confessions of his true identity. Finally, he settled on something simple. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Emma and Grace haven't stopped talking about you. You're an extraordinary woman, Sarah." Her response came within minutes. "The pleasure was all mine. Your daughters are remarkable, and they're lucky to have such a devoted father. Sweet dreams to all of you." As Daniel finally prepared for bed, he realized that his simple experiment in discovering whether genuine goodness existed in the world had evolved into something far more complicated and significant. He was falling in love with Sarah Mitchell, and she was falling for someone who didn't actually exist. The question now was whether he had the courage to reveal his true identity and risk losing the most authentic connection he'd experienced since his wife's death, or whether he would continue living a lie that was becoming more elaborate and emotionally dangerous with each passing day. 3 weeks passed, like a beautiful dream that Daniel knew would eventually become a nightmare. During that time, he and his daughters had spent countless hours in Sarah's company, each interaction deepening both his love for her and his guilt over his continuing deception. Sarah's small house in Queens was exactly what Daniel had expected: a modest 2-bedroom home with a garden that showed evidence of loving care, mismatched furniture that created perfect comfort, and walls covered with photographs of former students. The piano she had mentioned was an old upright that had been carefully maintained, and Emma and Grace had taken to their weekly lessons with enthusiasm. "Your daughters have real musical talent," Sarah told Daniel one Thursday evening as they sat in her tiny kitchen drinking coffee while the girls practiced scales. "Emma has natural rhythm, and Grace has an intuitive understanding of melody." Daniel watched Sarah's face light up as she discussed his daughter's progress, and he felt the familiar combination of joy and guilt. Everything about Sarah's modest lifestyle reflected her genuine priorities. She had chosen teaching over more lucrative careers because she believed in education's power to transform lives. "I've been thinking," Sarah continued, then paused with slight hesitation. My lease is coming up for renewal next month, and my landlord is raising the rent substantially. I've been wondering if you and the girls might be interested in sharing expenses. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. What do you mean? I mean, Sarah said with gentle directness, I've noticed that you're struggling financially, and I have more space than I need. The girls could have their own room, you could save money on rent, and I'd have help with household expenses. It would be a practical arrangement that benefits everyone. The offer hit Daniel like a lightning strike. Sarah was proposing to share her home with them because she believed he couldn't afford adequate housing for his daughters. She was willing to reorganize her entire living situation to help what she perceived as a family in need. Sarah, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. She interrupted with the same gentle firmness she'd shown at the restaurant. I'm offering. Dan, I care about you and Emma and Grace. You're working so hard to provide for your daughters, and if I can help make that easier, why wouldn't I? Daniel stared at this extraordinary woman who was offering to share her home, her life, and her limited resources with people she'd known for less than a month. Her generosity wasn't motivated by romantic interest or expectation of reciprocal favors. She was simply responding to what she perceived as a need with the same natural kindness she showed everyone. The girls would love it here, Daniel said truthfully. Looking around the warm, comfortable space that felt more like home than his sterile Manhattan penthouse ever had. And I would love having them here, Sarah replied with obvious sincerity. This house has been too quiet since I moved in. It needs children's laughter and the chaos that comes with family life. That evening, as Daniel tucked Emma and Grace into their designer beds, he listened to them discuss Sarah's proposition with excitement that made his heart race. Daddy, can we really live with Miss Sarah? Grace asked with hope shining in her eyes. She has that garden where we could plant flowers, and she said we could help her bake cookies for her students. And the piano would be right there whenever we wanted to practice, Emma added practically. Plus, Miss Sarah makes the best hot chocolate ever, and she knows stories about everything. Daniel realized his daughters were more enthusiastic about the prospect of living in Sarah's modest house than they had ever been about their luxury penthouse. They craved the warmth and attention that Sarah provided more than any material comfort. The next morning, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to his corporate office, he called in sick and spent the day driving around Queens, looking at Sarah's neighborhood through different eyes. He watched children walk safely to school, neighbors help each other with groceries, and small businesses that knew their customers by name. That evening, Daniel was helping Emma with her homework when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his assistant's number, but he almost let it go to voicemail. Finally, professional obligation overcame personal preference. Mr. Harrison, his assistant said with barely contained excitement, the Henderson Industries acquisition just went through. The stock price jumped 12%. You're going to want to see the financial news coverage. Daniel felt his stomach drop. What news coverage? CNN, CNBC, Fox Business? Everyone's running the story. You're being hailed as a visionary. There's a great photo of you from the signing ceremony. Daniel's hands began shaking as he realized the implications. If Sarah saw any financial news coverage, his carefully constructed deception would crumble instantly. His face had been on business magazine covers often enough that anyone paying attention to economic news would recognize him immediately. Thank you for letting me know, Daniel said quietly, ending the call with trembling fingers. Emma looked up from her math homework with concern. Daddy, are you okay? You look scared. Daniel knelt beside his daughter's chair, looking into eyes that trusted him completely. Emma, Daddy needs to tell you and Grace something very important. Can you get your sister? As his daughters settled beside him on Sarah's comfortable couch, Daniel realized that his moment of truth had arrived 3 weeks sooner than he'd planned. The question now was whether Sarah's love was strong enough to survive the revelation that everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. But first, he had to tell his daughters that their evening of innocence and authenticity was about to collide with the reality of their father's wealth and the deception he had created to test the woman they had all learned to love. Daniel's hands trembled as he gathered his daughters close on Sarah's worn but comfortable couch, the weight of his deception finally demanding confession. Emma and Grace looked at him with complete trust, their faces reflecting concern for his obvious distress. "Girls," Daniel began, his voice thick with emotion, "Daddy needs to tell you something very important about our time with Miss Sarah." Grace immediately moved closer, her small hand finding his. "Are you in trouble, Daddy? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You and Emma have been perfect. But Daddy made a mistake, a big mistake that might hurt someone we all care about very much." Emma, always the more analytical twin, studied his face with intelligence that often surprised him. "What kind of mistake?" Daniel took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would begin unraveling the beautiful illusion they had all been living. "Do you remember when we first came to the park, and I told you we were pretending to be a family that didn't have much money?" Both girls nodded, their expressions growing more serious as they sensed the gravity of the conversation. "Well, that pretending was supposed to be just for one day. But then we met Miss Sarah, and she was so kind to us, and—" Daniel struggled to find age-appropriate words for the complex emotions that had driven his continued deception. Daddy wanted to see if Miss Sarah would still be nice to us if she thought we needed help, instead of if she knew we had lots of money. Grace's brow furrowed with confusion. "But why wouldn't she be nice to us? Miss Sarah is nice to everyone." "That's exactly what Daddy learned," Daniel said, feeling tears threaten his composure. "Miss Sarah is genuinely good and kind, no matter what. But now she thinks Daddy needs help with money, and she's been trying to take care of all of us because she believes we're struggling." Emma's eyes widened with understanding. That went beyond her 6 years. "You mean Miss Sarah has been spending her teacher money on us because she thinks we don't have enough money?" "Yes," Daniel whispered, the shame of it nearly overwhelming him. "She paid for our dinner, she offered to give you piano lessons for free, and she even invited us to live in her house because she thinks Daddy can't afford a good place for you to live." The twins exchanged a look that conveyed more communication than many adults achieved with lengthy conversations. Finally, Grace spoke with the devastating honesty that children possessed. "Daddy, that's not fair to Miss Sarah. She's been taking care of us with her heart, but you've been lying to her." Daniel felt like he'd been struck by lightning. His 6-year-old daughter had articulated the moral core of his deception with clarity that cut through all his rationalizations and justifications. "You're absolutely right, Grace. Daddy has been lying, and that's wrong. Miss Sarah deserves to know the truth about who we really are." "Are you going to tell her?" Emma asked with practical concern. "Will she be mad at us?" "I'm going to tell her tonight," Daniel said, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "And she might be mad at Daddy, but I don't think she could ever be mad at you. You didn't know about the lying, you just enjoyed spending time with someone who cares about you." Grace's lower lip began to tremble. "Will Miss Sarah still want to be our friend when she finds out we have lots of money? Will she think we don't need her anymore?" Daniel pulled both girls into a tight hug, his heart breaking at their innocent worry that wealth might cost them the first genuine adult friendship they had experienced outside their privileged bubble. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope she'll understand that money doesn't change how much we care about her, or how wonderful she is, or how much we've enjoyed being part of her life. But Miss Sarah might feel hurt that Daddy wasn't honest from the beginning." Emma pulled back to look at him seriously. "Daddy, will you tell Miss Sarah that we really love her?" That we want to be her family even if we have money? I'll tell her everything, Daniel promised, his voice breaking with the weight of what he was about to lose. And I'll make sure she knows that the most important thing I learned wasn't about her character. It was about what real love and family actually mean. That night, as Daniel prepared to make the phone call that would either save or destroy the most important relationship of his life, he realized that Sarah Mitchell had already given him the greatest gift imaginable. She had shown him how to be a better father, a better man, and someone worthy of genuine love. Whether she could forgive his deception remained to be seen, but her impact on his life was already permanent and transformative. Daniel's hands shook as he ended the call, the weight of his impending exposure crushing down on him like a physical force. His carefully constructed world of deception was about to crumble, and the woman he'd fallen desperately in love with was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about him was a lie. Emma looked up from her homework with growing concern. "Daddy, you look really scared. What's wrong?" Daniel knelt beside his daughter's chair, looking into eyes that trusted him completely, despite the elaborate deception he'd been living for weeks. "Emma, I need to tell you and Grace something very important. Can you get your sister?" As his daughters settled beside him on Sarah's comfortable couch, Daniel realized that his moment of truth had arrived sooner than he'd ever planned. The question now was whether Sarah's love was strong enough to survive learning that the struggling single father she'd been helping was actually one of the wealthiest men in America. "Girls," Daniel began, his voice heavy with emotions he could no longer contain, "do you remember when we first came to the park, and I told you we were pretending to be a family that didn't have much money?" Both girls nodded, their expressions growing serious as they sensed the gravity of the conversation. "Well, that pretending was supposed to be just for one day, but then we met Miss Sarah, and she was so kind to us, and Daddy wanted to see if she would still be nice if she thought we needed help, instead of knowing we had lots of money." Grace's brow furrowed with confusion. "But why wouldn't she be nice to us? Miss Sarah is nice to everyone." "That's exactly what Daddy learned," Daniel said, feeling tears threaten his composure. "Miss Sarah is genuinely good and kind, no matter what. But now she thinks Daddy needs help with money, and she's been trying to take care of all of us because she believes we're struggling." Emma's eyes widened with understanding beyond her 6 years. "You mean Miss Sarah has been spending her teacher money on us because she thinks we don't have enough?" "Yes," Daniel whispered, the shame nearly overwhelming him. "She paid for our dinner, offered free piano lessons, and even invited us to live in her house because she thinks Daddy can't afford a good place for you to live." And the twins exchanged a look that conveyed more than many adult conversations. Finally, Grace spoke with devastating honesty. "Daddy, that's not fair to Miss Sarah. She's been taking care of us with her heart, but you've been lying to her." Daniel felt struck by lightning. His 6-year-old daughter had articulated the moral core of his deception with clarity that cut through all his rationalizations. "You're absolutely right, Grace. Daddy has been lying, and that's wrong. Miss Sarah deserves to know the truth about who we really are." "Are you going to tell her?" Emma asked with practical concern. "Will she be mad at us?" "I'm going to tell her tonight," Daniel said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. "She might be mad at Daddy, but I don't think she could ever be mad at you. You didn't know about the lying." Grace's lower lip began to tremble. "Will Miss Sarah still want to be our friend when she finds out we have lots of money? Will she think we don't need her anymore?" Daniel pulled both girls into a tight hug, his heart breaking at their innocent worry that wealth might cost them the first genuine adult friendship they'd experienced outside their privileged world. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope she'll understand that money doesn't change how much we care about her, or how wonderful she is. But Miss Sarah might feel hurt that Daddy wasn't honest from the beginning." Emma pulled back to look at him seriously. "Daddy, will you tell Miss Sarah that we really love her, That we want to be her family even if we have money? I'll tell her everything, Daniel promised, his voice breaking. And I'll make sure she knows that the most important thing I learned wasn't about her character. It was about what real love and family actually mean. That evening, as Daniel prepared to make the phone call that would either save or destroy the most important relationship of his life, he realized that Sarah Mitchell had already given him the greatest gift imaginable. She had shown him how to be a better father, a better man, and someone worthy of genuine love. At exactly 7:30 that evening, Daniel's phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID, but her voice sounded different, strained, confused, and tinged with hurt that made his stomach clench with dread. "Dan, I just saw something on the news that I don't understand," Sarah said without preamble. "There's a story about a major business deal, and they're showing a picture of someone who looks exactly like you, but they're calling him Daniel Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, and saying he's worth billions of dollars." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the last walls of his deception crumbling around him. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" Sarah's voice carried a tremor that spoke of betrayal and growing realization. "Because right now, I'm looking at a photograph of you in an expensive suit, shaking hands with executives, and the caption says, 'You just made a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars.' The same man who told me he was struggling financially and couldn't afford piano lessons for his daughters." The pain in her voice was like a knife through Daniel's heart. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't prepared for how devastating it would feel to hear Sarah's trust shatter in real time. "Sarah, please let me come over and explain everything. It's not what you think. It's not what I think." Sarah's voice rose with a mixture of anger and hurt that Daniel had never heard from her before. "What I think is that I've been played for a fool by someone who thought it would be amusing to see how far the naive teacher would go to help what she believed was a struggling family." "No, Sarah, that's not—" "I paid for your dinner, Dan, or Daniel, or whoever you really are. I offered you my home, my time, my heart, because I thought you needed help. I was planning to give up my savings to help you provide for your daughters, and you're worth more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. Daniel could hear tears in her voice now, and each one felt like acid on his conscience. "Sarah, please listen to me. Yes, I have money. Yes, I lied about my financial situation. But everything else was real. My feelings for you, the way Emma and Grace adore you, the way you've changed our lives, all of that is completely genuine." "How can I believe anything you say now?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "If you could lie about something so fundamental. What else have you been lying about? Do you even really care about me? Or was I just an interesting social experiment?" The accusation hit Daniel like a physical blow because he could understand why she would think that. From her perspective, his behavior looked like the cruel entertainment of a bored, rich man. "Sarah, I know how this looks, but I swear to you that my feelings are real. I started this because I wanted to know if you would care about me as a person rather than for my money. But I kept pretending because I fell in love with you, and I was terrified that learning about my wealth would change everything between us. So you made that decision for me," Sarah said with quiet dignity that was somehow more devastating than shouting would have been. "You decided that I couldn't be trusted with the truth, that I wasn't worthy of honesty, that I needed to be tested like some kind of laboratory specimen." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as he realized how his actions must have felt from her perspective. "Sarah, I was wrong. I was scared and stupid and wrong, but please don't punish Emma and Grace for my mistakes. They love you genuinely, and they had no idea about the deception." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, but filled with an exhaustion that spoke of dreams dying in real time. "Daniel, I need time to think about all of this. I need to figure out how much of what I thought I knew about you was real and how much was performance. I can't do that while you're trying to convince me of anything. Sarah, please don't shut me out. Let me prove to you that my love is real. Love? Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. How can you talk about love when our entire relationship has been built on lies? How can I trust any emotion you claim to feel when you've been acting a role for weeks? Daniel felt desperation clawing at his chest. Because the man you fell in love with is real, Sarah. The money doesn't change who I am inside. The father who loves his daughters. The man who found peace in your kitchen. The person who discovered what happiness actually feels like. That's all real. I don't know what's real anymore, Sarah whispered. And until I do, I think it's best if we don't see each other. Please don't call me. Please don't come to my house. I need space to process what you've done and decide whether there's any foundation left to build on. The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at his phone in the silence of his penthouse, surrounded by wealth that had never felt more meaningless than in that moment when he realized he might have lost the only thing that truly mattered. For 3 days, Daniel existed in a state of emotional purgatory that made every previous business crisis seem trivial by comparison. He moved through his corporate responsibilities like a ghost, attending meetings and making decisions while his heart remained shattered in Sarah's modest queen's kitchen where she had hung up on him. Emma and Grace sensed their father's devastation with the intuitive accuracy that children possessed. They asked repeatedly about Miss Sarah, whether she was still angry and when they could see her again. Each innocent question felt like salt in an open wound, reminding Daniel that his deception had potentially cost his daughters the most meaningful adult relationship they'd ever experienced outside their family. "Daddy," Grace said on Thursday morning as they sat in their sterile penthouse dining room eating breakfast prepared by their chef. "Why can't we just go to Miss Sarah's house and tell her we're sorry?" "Because Miss Sarah needs time to think about everything that's happened," Daniel explained, though he was beginning to wonder if time would heal this particular wound or simply allow it to become infected with permanent resentment. "But we didn't do anything wrong," Emma protested with 6-year-old logic. "We didn't know you were pretending. We just liked spending time with her because she's nice to us." Daniel realized his daughters had identified the tragedy at the heart of the situation. Their innocent affection for Sarah had been genuine from the beginning. But now they were paying the price for his elaborate deception. They had lost access to someone who had brought joy, warmth, and authentic care into their privileged but emotionally sterile lives. On Thursday afternoon, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of sending his usual corporate car to collect the girls from school, he drove himself in the modest rental sedan he'd been using for his disguise and waited outside Willowbrook Elementary like any other parent. When Emma and Grace emerged from the building, their faces lit up with excitement at seeing him personally, rather than through the tinted windows of a chauffeur-driven vehicle. "Daddy!" Grace called out, running toward him with her backpack bouncing. "Are we going to see Miss Sarah today?" "Not today, sweetheart," Daniel said, kneeling to hug both girls. "But I want to take you somewhere special. We're going to visit the place where Miss Sarah used to work before she came to your school." 20 minutes later, they stood outside Lincoln Elementary School, a public institution in one of Queens's most economically challenged neighborhoods. The building was clearly underfunded, with peeling paint and playground equipment that had seen better decades. But it radiated the same warmth and energy that Daniel had come to associate with Sarah's teaching philosophy. "This is where Miss Sarah worked before?" Emma asked, studying the modest building with curiosity rather than judgment. "Yes, and she chose to work here because she believed every child deserves excellent education." regardless of their family's income, Daniel explained, beginning to understand Sarah's character in ways his wealth had previously prevented him from seeing. They spent an hour walking through the neighborhood, observing the small businesses, community centers, and families who represented Sarah's world. Daniel watched his daughters interact with children from backgrounds vastly different from their own, and he saw them respond with the same natural kindness that Sarah had modeled during their weeks together. "Daddy," Grace said as they drove home through Queen's traffic, "Miss Sarah chose to help kids who didn't have very much money, didn't she?" "Yes, she did. And then she thought we didn't have very much money, so she tried to help us too." "That's right." Emma, always analytical, processed this information with serious concentration. "So Miss Sarah helps people because that's who she is, not because of what they can give her back?" "Exactly." Then why did you need to pretend we were poor to find that out?" Grace asked with devastating 6-year-old directness. "Couldn't you just watch how she treated other people?" Daniel felt his breath catch at his daughter's innocent but profound observation. She had identified the fundamental flaw in his logic with clarity that cut through all his rationalizations. Sarah's character had been evident in her career choices, her volunteer work, and her daily interactions with everyone around her. He hadn't needed to deceive her to understand her true nature. He had needed to deceive himself to justify his own fears and insecurities. "You're absolutely right, Grace," Daniel admitted quietly. "Daddy made this much more complicated than it needed to be because he was scared of being hurt." That evening, Daniel sat in his home office, staring at a blank piece of paper, trying to find words that could possibly express the depth of his remorse and the sincerity of his love. How do you apologize for betraying someone's trust while simultaneously trying to convince them that your feelings are genuine? How do you prove that your emotions are real when the foundation of the relationship was built on lies? Finally, he began to write, "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to understand that loving you and losing you has taught me more about myself than all my business success combined. You deserve so much better than what I put you through. But if you'll give me the chance, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that the man you fell in love with was real, even if the circumstances weren't." As he sealed the letter, Daniel realized that Sarah had already transformed him in ways that went far beyond their romantic relationship. She had shown him what authentic human connection looked like, taught him that his daughters needed his presence more than his presence, and demonstrated that true wealth was measured in love rather than dollars. Whether she forgave him or not, Sarah Mitchell had given him the most valuable gift of his life, the understanding of what really mattered. Sarah's letter arrived the next morning, delivered by hand to Daniel's corporate office, in an envelope that bore her careful handwriting. His assistant brought it directly to his private conference room, where he was supposed to be reviewing quarterly projections, but had instead been staring out the window, thinking about warm kitchens and children's laughter. With trembling hands, Daniel opened the envelope and found 3 pages of Sarah's characteristic thoughtful prose, written in the same clear script she used for lesson plans and student evaluations. "Daniel," the letter began, and even seeing his real name in her handwriting made his chest tighten with emotion. "I've spent the past week trying to understand how I could have been so wrong about someone I thought I knew so well. I've been angry, hurt, confused, and heartbroken. But most of all, I've been trying to figure out which parts of our time together were real and which were performance." Daniel's hands shook as he continued reading. "I've thought about every conversation we had, every moment we shared, every interaction you had with Emma and Grace. And here's what I've concluded. The man who knelt beside Marcus to help him with multiplication, who listened patiently to Grace's stories about her imaginary pet dragon, who looked at me like I was precious rather than convenient, that man was real. Daniel felt tears beginning to stream down his face as hope flickered to life in his chest. But the man who decided to test my character without my knowledge, who let me pay for dinners I couldn't afford while sitting on a billion-dollar fortune, who allowed me to offer you my home when you live in a penthouse, that man showed a fundamental lack of respect for my agency and dignity that I'm struggling to forgive. The hope that had been building crumbled again as Daniel confronted the full scope of how his actions had affected her. Emma and Grace came to see me yesterday, Sarah continued, and Daniel's eyes widened in shock. They showed up at my door with a drawing they'd made together, a picture of all four of us having dinner at my kitchen table. Grace told me that they missed me, and Emma asked if I was angry at them for having rich daddy instead of poor daddy. Daniel closed his eyes, imagining his daughters walking to Sarah's house on their own, driven by the same need for connection that had motivated his original deception. Their innocence broke my heart, Daniel. These beautiful children love me genuinely, and I love them with every fiber of my being. They don't deserve to lose our friendship because their father made complicated choices that they couldn't understand or control. Sarah's letter continued. So here's what I've decided. I want to maintain my relationship with Emma and Grace. If you'll allow it, they can continue their piano lessons, and they're welcome in my home any time. But my relationship with you needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, if it's going to exist at all. Daniel's heart raced as he read her conditions. If you want any chance of earning back my trust, you need to prove that the person I fell in love with is who you really are when the disguise comes off. No more deception, no more testing, no more manipulation of circumstances to control outcomes. Just honesty, transparency, and the willingness to be vulnerable without scripts or strategies. The letter's final paragraph made Daniel's breath catch. I'm not promising anything beyond the opportunity to start over. I don't know if I can forgive what you did, and I don't know if I can trust you with my heart again. But I do know that what we had was too precious to dismiss without giving truth a chance to heal what lies have broken. If you're willing to do the work of earning back what you threw away, then call me Sunday evening at 7. We'll start with one honest conversation and see where it leads. At exactly 7 o'clock on Sunday evening, Daniel dialed Sarah's number with hands that trembled more than they had during his first billion-dollar acquisition. When she answered, her voice was carefully neutral, neither warm nor cold, but simply present. Hello, Daniel. Sarah, thank you for giving me this chance, he began, his carefully prepared speech dissolving into simple honesty. I've spent the past week trying to figure out how to explain myself. But I realize that explanations aren't what you need. You need the truth, all of it, even the parts that make me look terrible. I'm listening. Daniel took a deep breath and began the most important conversation of his life. The truth is that I've been lonely for so long that I'd forgotten what genuine connection felt like. After Catherine died, every woman who showed interest in me knew about my money from the beginning, and I never knew if they cared about me or my bank account. He paused, gathering courage to continue. When I met you at the parent conference, you treated me like a person rather than a billionaire. You cared about my daughters as children, not as extensions of my wealth. And for the first time in years, I felt seen for who I am, rather than what I own. So you decided to test me, Sarah said quietly. Yes, and that was wrong. It was manipulative and disrespectful, and it violated your right to make informed decisions about your own life. I told myself I was protecting my heart. But really, I was protecting my ego from the possibility that even someone as good as you might treat me differently if you knew about my money. Daniel's voice grew thick with emotion as he continued. But Sarah, the man you fell in love with is real. The father who reads bedtime stories, who burns pancakes on Sunday mornings, who worries about whether his daughters will grow up to be kind people. That's who I am when the corporate armor comes off. And the billionaire who manipulates situations to get what he wants? Sarah asked. That's who I've been in business, but it's not who I want to be in life. You've shown me the difference between success and fulfillment, between having everything and actually being happy. I don't want to be the kind of man who lies to the people he loves, even if those lies started from fear rather than malice. There was a long silence before Sarah spoke again. Daniel, what you did hurt me deeply. Not just the deception, but the assumption that I needed to be tested, that my character was somehow in question rather than yours. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my life. But, Sarah continued, and Daniel's heart leaped at that single word, I've seen how you are with Emma and Grace. I've seen how you listen when people talk, how you care about things that matter. I've seen kindness in you that can't be faked, even if other things were. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as hope began to bloom in his chest. So here's what I propose, Sarah said, with the same careful thoughtfulness she brought to everything important. We start over completely. No more Dan, the struggling single father. No more testing or manipulation. Just Daniel Harrison, exactly as you are, getting to know Sarah Mitchell exactly as I am. I would like that more than anything, Daniel whispered. There are conditions, Sarah continued firmly. Complete honesty from now on, no matter how uncomfortable. If something scares you about our relationship, you talk to me about it instead of creating elaborate scenarios to avoid the fear. And you need to understand that rebuilding trust takes time. There's no timeline for forgiveness. I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. And Emma and Grace come first, whatever happens between us. They don't get hurt by adult complications they didn't create. Agreed completely. Sarah's voice softened slightly. They're remarkable children, Daniel. You should be proud of the father you are, not just the businessman you've become. They love you, Sarah. These past weeks with you have been the happiest they've been since their mother died. I do love them, Sarah admitted quietly. And despite everything, I think I still love you too. The real you, not the performance or the test or the disguise. But love isn't enough if there isn't trust, and trust has to be earned. Daniel felt his heart soar and break simultaneously. She loved him, but he had damaged something precious that might never fully heal. Sarah, what can I do to earn back your trust? Time, Daniel. Time and consistency and the daily choice to be honest, even when it's difficult. Start by taking me on a real first date, as yourself, with your real life, showing me who you actually are when you're not pretending to be someone else. Would Friday night work? Daniel asked, hope making his voice stronger. Friday night would be perfect. Pick me up at 7, and Daniel? Yes? This time, I'm paying for my own dinner. For the first time in a week, Daniel smiled with genuine joy. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning that sparkled with fresh snow, Daniel Harrison stood in Sarah Mitchell's kitchen watching the most beautiful chaos he'd ever witnessed. Emma and Grace were helping Sarah bake cookies for her new classroom at Lincoln Elementary, where she had returned to teach after Daniel's foundation provided funding for smaller class sizes. The kitchen counters were covered with flour, the girls had more chocolate chips on their faces than in the cookie dough, and Sarah was laughing at something Grace had said about reindeer eating vegetables. It was everything Daniel's sterile penthouse had never been, warm, messy, alive with love and laughter. "Daddy, look!" Emma called out, holding up a cookie shaped vaguely like a star. "Miss Sarah taught us how to make cookies that don't burn." Unlike when Daddy tries to cook, Grace added with 6-year-old frankness that made Sarah laugh even harder. Daniel wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, breathing in the scent of vanilla and home that had come to define happiness for him. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured into her hair. "You didn't get lucky," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "You did the work. You chose honesty over fear, vulnerability over control, and love over protection. That's not luck, Daniel. That's character." The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of Daniel's life. True to her word, Sarah had made him earn back her trust, one day at a time. There had been difficult conversations about his tendency to solve problems with money rather than presence, painful discussions about how his wealth could impact their relationship, and honest examinations of whether their different backgrounds could truly be bridged. But there had also been magic. Real first dates where Daniel showed Sarah his actual life, not the disguised version, but his genuine world, with all its privileges and responsibilities. Family dinners where Emma and Grace could finally be themselves without worrying about maintaining any pretense. Quiet evenings in Sarah's modest house, where Daniel learned that contentment had nothing to do with square footage. Most importantly, Daniel had discovered that loving someone honestly was infinitely more fulfilling than being loved under false pretenses. Sarah knew about his wealth, his corporate responsibilities, and his tendency toward overprotectiveness, and she loved him anyway, not despite these things or because of them, but as part of the complete picture of who he was. "Sarah," Daniel said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket while Emma and Grace watched with excitement they could barely contain. 6 months ago. "I asked you to start over with complete honesty. Today, I want to ask you something else with the same honesty." Sarah's eyes widened as Daniel dropped to one knee in her flour-dusted kitchen, surrounded by the sweet chaos of family life. "I love you not because you're kind to children, or because you see the best in people, or because you're beautiful, though you are all those things. I love you because you make me want to be the best version of myself. You've shown me that real wealth is measured in love, that success means building something meaningful with people who matter." Emma and Grace moved closer, holding hands as they watched their father propose to the woman who had become the center of their family. "Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that the man you fell in love with is real, that his love is genuine, and that together we can build something more valuable than any fortune?" Sarah's answer came through tears of joy that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. "Yes, Daniel Harrison, yes to all of it." As Daniel slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, Emma and Grace cheered with pure delight, flour flying everywhere as they danced around the kitchen. But Daniel only had eyes for Sarah, the woman who had seen through his disguise to find the man he'd forgotten he could be. Later that evening, as they sat together on Sarah's couch watching the girls play piano duets, Sarah leaned against Daniel's shoulder with the contentment of someone who had found exactly what she hadn't known she was looking for. "Do you ever regret how we started?" Daniel asked quietly. Sarah considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the deception and the pain it caused, but I don't regret what it taught us both. You learned that love doesn't require testing, and I learned that forgiveness can rebuild what seemed irreparably broken." She looked up at him with eyes that held no shadows of the past, only bright promise for the future. "Besides, our story isn't about how it began, it's about how we chose to continue it. And I choose to continue it with truth, with love, and with the understanding that the best things in life aren't the ones you can buy, but the ones you build together." As Emma's laughter filled the room and Grace's off-key singing provided soundtrack to their evening, Daniel realized that Sarah was absolutely right. Their love story hadn't been perfect from the beginning, but it had become perfect for them, honest, hard-won, and infinitely more valuable than any fortune he could have accumulated alone.